All right, guys. Day one of the 2023 NFL Draft just wrapped up a few minutes ago. The Chiefs took us home with Felix, and we are waiting now on day two tomorrow starting at 4 p.m. So the day was definitely very interesting. Definitely a lot of polarizing selections made by a lot of teams, and the Seahawks were definitely part of that. The Seahawks were they I think I know what's going on here. The reason why I can't really get upset about anything is because I know a lot of Seahawks fans are very upset right now. I know. And often when Seahawks fans don't like what the team is doing, I'm there with them because the things that they're doing are so obviously not right. But I think I know what's going on here, and I can't be upset about it. I can say that there are some players that I think they could have taken that were a little bit better than the players that they did take. I can say that there are some players that I think maybe could have done more, especially in the short term for this team. But what I can say is this. The Seahawks are following what I believe to be a pretty clear philosophy right now. They are pure, unadulterated BPA. They are following BPA as their Bible. And BPA, for those of you who don't know, stands for Best Player Available. We are drafting best player available as much as we possibly can. Whatever our needs may be, whatever might make sense in our heads, they are drafting BPA. And I cannot get upset about a team drafting BPA. Now, here's the thing. BPA is subjective. What is BPA to one person will not be BPA to another person. So understand that they're taking some of these guys. I'm not saying I think they're the best players. I don't. I think at both selections, you can make an argument that there were many better players available. I had other players ranked higher on my big board, for sure. However, and this is the really important part to keep in mind here, is that a big part of that also has to do with usage. How are we going to utilize that player? How are we going to make the best with those players? And I go into the draft with a certain belief on the way the Seahawks like to do things, and I construct my big board accordingly. But then the Seahawks can always change their mind about how they do things, and I think this draft is a great example of that. 2 picks in this first round. 2 picks. We used both picks on players that, as the Seahawks were run in previous years, I don't think makes sense. However, if they choose to change the way they do things, I think it becomes at least good. Maybe not great, but at the very least good. So, number 5 comes around. Jalen Carter's there. And let me address the Jalen Carter thing real quick because a lot of Seahawks fans are still hung up on him. Still not really over it, I think. So, I'm going to try my best to put this to rest. I'm not going to sit here and say that I can't tell you guys how to feel, but you guys got to let that. But I think you guys really need to let that one go. The Jalen Carter thing, we passed on him. The Lions passed on him. The Raiders passed on him. The Bears took the worst trade down offer I have ever seen in my life. Like generally like F- trade. A future 4th round pick, a 2024 4th round pick to move down one spot in the top 10 because they didn't want Carter. They didn't want Carter so much they gave away their number 9 pick so they didn't have to trade him. All right? The Eagles took him because they can afford to miss. They have such a good team, such a good defensive line, they can afford to miss on Jalen Carter. They have a GM with a massive amount of job security. They have a GM who can afford to make a mistake and still keep his job and still have a good team. That's not the situation most teams are in. So, accept that Jalen Carter was doing stupid stuff off the field, accept that we were not in the room when they had the interview trying to figure out what this guy was all about, accept that John Schneider and Pete Carroll were paying a lot of money to investigators, PIs, private detectives, looking into his past, looking into his history. Except that there's just information on Jalen Carter that we do not have and we can never have. Normally, I don't say things like this. You guys know. If I think that Pete and John are messing up, then I will call them out on it. But here, we just have to say they know better than we do and accept it. Now, that being said, you take Devon Witherspoon at number 5. And I had him kind of low on my big board because I was looking at things through the lens of a zone defense. We run zone. We've always run zone here. And I believe that as long as Pete Carroll's here, we're always going to want to run zone. So I didn't have Devon Witherspoon very high. If we ran man, or I believed that it was a high probability we were going to run man in 2023, I would have felt differently and I would have had him a lot higher because he is incredibly good in man coverage. Go look at his PFF man coverage grades if you want evidence of that. That being said, there are legitimate concerns with him. I'm not denying that. There are legitimate concerns with Devon Witherspoon, mostly revolving around his size and his arm length. Neither is great. But if we are willing to run man, we are talking about a really good tackler, a hard hitter, a ball hawk, somebody who's really good at sticking with receivers, somebody who should be an elite cornerback in man coverage. If we run zone, then I don't get the pick. Then I think it's a bad pick. I think it's a decent pick as long as we're committing to running man. And by the way, Tariq Woolen, more than fast enough to run man. So suddenly you have two elite man corners. You start running man coverage at least some of the time. So you've got something really special here. So we got to give them some credit there. So what I'm trying to say is, at that point in the draft, you had Jalen Carter there. Maybe you didn't want Jalen Carter because there was something about him that you just didn't trust. That's totally fine. There was Christian Gonzalez, but maybe you didn't view him as being the scheme fit that I thought that he would be because he's scheme versatile. Maybe you were looking at Witherspoon and going, well, he's much better in man, so therefore we look at him as better because that's what we're going to do this year. You were looking at maybe some of these other guys that were ranked highly like Levis. Maybe you didn't have Levis that high on your board. Or maybe you were sitting there thinking, we know something nobody else does. We can get Levis later. And by the way, Levis is still on the board. So you're looking at all that and you're going, all right, so Witherspoon is actually our best player on the board. Witherspoon's actually our number one player left, or at the very least in the top three. So what I'm trying to get at here is that with that pick, whether you agree or not, I think the Seahawks took their BPA. They took their best player available at number 5. So, BPA. And then you get to number 20. And you guys know that I wasn't a big fan of JSN, mostly because, and here's the thing that really needs to be understood here. This is important. Mostly because the Seahawks do not run 3 receiver sets that often. We run 3 receiver sets less than average. Well below average, I believe. We like to use 3 tight end sets more. So I was thinking, why would I want a third wide receiver, a slot wide receiver, on a team that doesn't run a lot of 3 receiver sets? But then you draft JSN, who everybody knows is mostly, especially right now, a slot receiver. So what happens? Well, the only logical assumption is that the team is smart enough to realize, hey, we got to start running 3 receiver sets most of the time. 75% or more, I would say. So if the team's willing to commit to that and they're willing to do that, I think that changes the math. If you look at the big boards across the internet, just like you can with Witherspoon, you look at the big boards before the draft. Witherspoon was in the top 10 of most of them. He was in the top 10 of the aggregate, I believe. JSN was in the top 15 of the aggregate as well. So if you remove the positional qualifier, if you remove the consideration of, oh, we don't use slot receivers that much, and therefore JSN isn't really worth the pick, you remove that from the equation, and you have a guy who is almost certainly BPA at number 20. So you put all that together and you're like, yeah, this Seahawks team, they're not addressing their needs. They're drafting at cornerback and wide receiver, 2 positions that they were fairly comfortable at. But maybe they're just saying, we don't care about our needs. We want the best players. We want BPA. Over and over and over again, we're going to take BPA, going to stack up as much talent and as many good players as possible and see what happens. And I think some of this may stem from the fact that we do not necessarily have an owner that is on board with completely going for it. We don't have a long-term owner. We have an owner that is probably going to be gone in a couple years, and she's not trying to put a bunch of big long-term financial stress on this team that another owner is going to have to inherit. So that being the case, maybe we're thinking to ourselves like, okay, let's not worry about bending ourselves backwards to win the Super Bowl right now. It's probably not going to happen. It is what it is. It sucks, but I think we're just going to have to live with that for now. And let's just take the BPA. Our defensive line is going to be terrible this year. Oh, well. It's not like we're going to win the Super Bowl anyway. Like, we don't have enough financial flexibility. We don't have enough ability to do things like backloading. We don't have enough ability to use void years. We don't have those things. We can't even restructure a guy like a Tyler Lockett. So how are we going to win the Super Bowl? So let's just pile up as much talent as possible so that we're in a really good position when we get the new owner. Maybe that's the mentality here. I mean, if we were trying to win the Super Bowl this year, then yeah, maybe we just hold our nose and say, okay, we have to take Jalen Carter. We just have to do it. But because maybe we're not in that situation, we decide, you know what? Why take the risk? Let's take the player that we think is better and a more sure thing. So I don't love what we did today. I gave our picks a B- and a B. It's okay. It's decent. I'm not sad about it. I'm not pumping my fist about it. But I believe we went for BPA on our board. We went for BPA on our board. You may disagree with that board. You may not like that board, but it's our board. And it's the board that a lot of people have. If you look at big boards across the internet, Witherspoon was a top 8 guy and JSN was a top 15 guy. JSN was a top 10 guy on PFF, I think. So I'm not saying you have to love these picks, but there are a lot of people who had the reaction of, oh, well, these picks came out of nowhere. And I don't think that's the case. I think they came out of nowhere because we were looking at things through a somewhat narrowed window. I admit I was looking at things of, okay, we're running a zone defense. We're going to run a lot of 2 receiver sets, even some 1 receiver sets. And we're trying to win the Super Bowl now and we need to fix our defensive line. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe that's not the way we're playing things. Maybe we're just going to shrug our shoulders on the defensive line for this year. Now, tomorrow, we get started at 4 o'clock p.m. I will be eating dinner on stream for those of you who are into the whole mukbang thing, I guess. You guys can come watch that. But we've got some good players remaining. Now, unfortunately, a lot of my favorite players still in the draft are secondary players, defensive backs. We already took a defensive back. I don't think we're going to take another. Will Levis is still on the board. We could get our QB of the future, who is supposed to be a top 5 pick, in the 2nd round. How amazing would that be? Getting a QB of the future without even using a top 30 pick on him. That's on the table. Trenton Simpson still out there. Darnell Washington. These are 2 of my favorite picks that we could make in this draft. 2 picks that I've really been in love with this whole time. Trenton Simpson, Darnell Washington still there. Very good chance of being there at 37. We have some opportunity to improve our front 7 still with guys like Drew Sanders, guys like Keanu Benton, who at this point is becoming kind of a must. We really need to make sure we get him. Adetomiwa Adebawore could be there at 37 as well. So there are going to be some intriguing opportunities here to pick up help at 37 and 52 and 83. It's not the draft that I necessarily expected we were going to have to this point, but I don't think it's a bad draft. I don't. I don't love it. I think we could have done a little bit better. I would have gone a different way, but at the same time, that's me speaking with the assumption of the Seahawks are going to be doing things this way. Maybe we're changing the way we're doing things. Maybe we're going to run 3 receiver sets as much as the Rams do. If we do, then JSN's going to be worth that 1st round pick. I can pretty much guarantee it. He is that good in the slot. Devon Witherspoon, I believe in a man-based scheme, would be worth a number 5 overall pick. I don't think the Jets are unhappy with what they got out of Sauce Gardner last year. And I think Sauce Gardner can be... and I think that Devon Witherspoon can have the same impact that Sauce Gardner did. So, excited to see what comes next. One final note that I want to make in kind of a macro sense. In the modern NFL, stopping the run doesn't really matter that much. At least not nearly as much as it used to. So, spending your 1st round picks on players that are designed to help you stop the run may be a little bit of an overreach. So, when you look at things that way, I do think it makes a little more sense why we decided we were going to address our more serious needs, or at least in our mind, the higher positional value of helping our passing attack and helping our pass defense rather than focusing on trying to fix the run defense when we can do that in the 2nd and 3rd and 4th and 5th round. All right. So that's your day 1 recap. See you guys later. Go Hawks. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you guys had fun. And hope you guys can, at the very least, understand what is going on with this team right now. See you guys later. To Go Hawks.